Jerry Lane is introduced as a man who has already stepped away from the dangerous world of international crisis response. Before the events of World War Z, Jerry had worked as a crisis investigator for the United Nations, a profession that required him to travel into unstable regions, recognize emerging threats, understand how governments and populations reacted under pressure, and make difficult decisions when ordinary rules no longer applied. He had seen enough chaos to know that disasters rarely arrive in a convenient or predictable form. Yet Jerry has deliberately left that life behind. Instead of spending his days in conflict zones and emergency situations, he wants something much simpler: time with his wife, Karen, and their daughters, Rachel and Connie. He has exchanged international crises for family routines, ordinary conversations, traffic, television, and the small comforts of domestic life. His retirement from fieldwork is important because it makes the opening of World War Z more emotionally powerful. Jerry is not a superhero waiting for an excuse to return to action. He is a father who wants to remain a father. But the world is about to force him back into the role he thought he had abandoned. The movie begins by creating an atmosphere of normality that gradually becomes disturbing. News reports mention strange incidents occurring in different parts of the world. There are references to unusual behavior, mysterious outbreaks, and unexplained violence. At first, these reports seem disconnected. They are the sort of stories that people might hear on television without immediately believing that they have anything to do with their own lives. That is one of the most frightening ideas in World War Z. The disaster does not initially look like the end of civilization. It looks like another news story. Jerry and his family are driving through Philadelphia when the ordinary world suddenly begins to collapse around them. Traffic becomes unusually heavy. Vehicles are stopping and crashing. People are running through the streets. Police officers are struggling to control crowds. Helicopters appear overhead. Something is clearly wrong, but nobody seems to understand the full scale of the danger. Then Jerry sees the first truly terrifying sign. People are attacking one another. At first, the violence seems like a riot or some kind of mass panic. Jerry does not immediately know what he is dealing with, but his professional instincts tell him that remaining stationary is extremely dangerous. His experience with crises has taught him that the first minutes of an emergency are often more important than the later stages. Confusion creates vulnerability. Crowds become dangerous. Roads become traps. Information becomes more valuable than almost anything else. While ordinary people panic, Jerry begins observing. That difference is crucial. The movie zombies are unlike the traditional image of the slow, stumbling undead. These infected people are terrifyingly fast. They sprint through streets, climb over obstacles, crash into vehicles, attack with overwhelming aggression, and continue moving even after suffering injuries that would stop ordinary human beings. Their speed completely changes the rules of survival. A traditional zombie story often gives survivors time to think. A slow zombie can be seen approaching. A person can run away, barricade a door, climb a staircase, or fight back. In World War Z, there is almost no such comfort. The infected can cross enormous distances in seconds. Jerry quickly realizes that the situation is not a conventional riot. The infected behave as though they are responding to a single instinct. They are not simply angry individuals. They move in enormous waves. This creates one of the film's most memorable visual ideas, the zombie swarm. Thousands of infected people rush together with astonishing speed, climbing over one another and forming living mountains of bodies. They pour through streets, over barriers, and into buildings. When they encounter a wall, they do not necessarily stop. Instead, they climb over each other, creating a horrifying biological staircase. The image transforms the zombie threat from an individual monster into a natural disaster. A single infected person is dangerous. 1,000 infected people become almost impossible to comprehend. Jerry's greatest advantage during this opening crisis is not a weapon. It is his ability to think while everyone else is panicking. He understands that survival begins with movement. He drives aggressively through the collapsing city, trying to keep his family away from the densest concentrations of infected people. His wife and daughters depend entirely on his judgment. Every decision has consequences. Stopping in the wrong place could mean being surrounded. Taking the wrong road could lead directly into a mass of infected people. Remaining near crowds could expose the family to infection. Jerry's crisis response instincts immediately become useful. He does not have all the answers, but he knows how to behave when there are no answers. This is one of the defining characteristics of his character. Jerry is not presented as someone who magically knows everything. Instead, he knows how to process incomplete information. He observes what is happening, identifies patterns, makes a decision, and acts. That ability saves his family. Karen also plays an important role during these moments. She is frightened, but she does not become completely helpless. She tries to protect their children while Jerry concentrates on finding a way out. Their relationship feels believable because their priorities are simple. They are not thinking about saving the world. They are thinking about keeping their daughters alive. Rachel and Connie represent the vulnerability of ordinary family life. Jerry can accept danger for himself, but seeing his children threatened makes the situation far more personal. Every time the family becomes separated, trapped, or exposed to danger, the emotional stakes rise. The chaos in Philadelphia becomes increasingly intense. Vehicles collide. People run in every direction. Buildings become unsafe. Emergency services struggle to keep up. The streets are filled with screaming people who have no idea where to go. And then the infected appear in greater numbers. The pandemic is no longer something happening somewhere else. It is happening everywhere. The film makes excellent use of this sudden transformation because it does not give the audience a comfortable transition. Civilization seems stable, and then within minutes it becomes almost unrecognizable. Jerry's family eventually escapes the immediate danger, but their problems are far from over. In fact, the Philadelphia sequence is only the beginning of a much larger story. Jerry understands something that many people around him do not yet understand. This is not a localized outbreak. It is a global crisis. His former professional experience becomes increasingly important because he knows how quickly a crisis can spread across borders. In the modern world, cities are connected through airplanes, highways, shipping routes, communication networks, and international travel. A disease that spreads extremely quickly does not remain contained simply because governments want it to. The very systems that make modern civilization convenient can also make a pandemic catastrophic. People can travel across continents in hours. Information can travel even faster. And an infection can travel with them. The frightening implication is that the outbreak may already have spread much farther than anyone realizes. Jerry's return to crisis work therefore feels almost inevitable. He has tried to leave that world behind, but circumstances force him to confront the same kind of large-scale emergency he once investigated. There is an important emotional conflict here. Jerry wants to protect his family. But protecting his family may require him to leave them. That is one of the central tragedies of his character. He knows that his expertise could help governments understand what is happening. He knows how to investigate unusual crises, identify patterns, and work under extreme pressure. But he also knows that every step away from Karen and the girls increases the possibility that he may never see them again. The film turns Jerry's former career into both a gift and a burden. His knowledge can save lives. But using that knowledge means putting his own life at risk. The sudden pandemic also changes the meaning of safety. Before the outbreak, Jerry believed that leaving fieldwork would create security. He had made a reasonable decision. He wanted to protect his family by building a peaceful life. But World War Z suggests that personal safety can be an illusion when society itself becomes unstable. A quiet suburban life depends on functioning institutions. It depends on hospitals. It depends on police. It depends on food distribution. It depends on electricity. It depends on transportation. It depends on communication. It depends on millions of strangers continuing to perform ordinary jobs. When those systems begin collapsing, the walls between ordinary life and catastrophe disappear very quickly. Jerry sees this firsthand. The first day of the outbreak is therefore more than an action sequence. It establishes the film's central philosophy about crisis. The greatest danger is not merely the infected themselves. It is confusion. People do not know what is happening. Authorities do not know what is happening. Families do not know where to go. Rumors spread faster than reliable information. Every person is trying to make an individual decision while the larger system is collapsing. Jerry's strength is that he understands how dangerous confusion can be. He keeps moving. He watches. He listens. He makes decisions. Most importantly, he does not waste time pretending that everything will return to normal. That is what separates him from many other characters. The infected also make the outbreak particularly horrifying because they appear to retain an almost frightening physical purpose. They are not wandering aimlessly. They are constantly moving toward living humans. They attack with overwhelming urgency. The film's depiction of infection adds another layer of terror. A person can be completely healthy and then suddenly become infected. The transformation can happen extraordinarily quickly. This means that there is very little time to determine who is safe. A stranger who appears healthy may become a threat moments later. A crowded room becomes dangerous. A hospital becomes dangerous. A public street becomes dangerous. Even helping an injured person can become risky. This destroys one of the assumptions that usually makes human societies function, the belief that other people are generally safe. In World War Z, every unfamiliar person becomes a potential threat. Jerry's instinct is therefore always to evaluate the environment. Where are the exits? Where are the crowds? Where can the infected reach? How quickly can they move? Where can his family hide? Which direction gives them the best chance? These questions are not asked in a calm laboratory. They are asked while cars crash around him and people scream in the streets. That is why Jerry's previous career matters so much. His greatest weapon is experience. He has already seen human beings behave irrationally during disasters. He understands that panic can be contagious even before a biological infection begins spreading. When frightened people believe there is no escape, they can create additional danger themselves. The Philadelphia sequence demonstrates this beautifully. The streets become clogged because everyone wants to escape simultaneously. The roads that are supposed to provide safety become traps. People abandon vehicles. Others steal vehicles. Families become separated. Emergency responders are overwhelmed. The city becomes a giant maze. Jerry has to navigate not only the physical threat but also the behavior of frightened humans. His family survives because he understands that the goal is not simply to run away from the infected. The goal is to think several steps ahead. Eventually, Jerry and his family manage to escape the immediate Philadelphia disaster. But the relief is temporary. The world outside is also collapsing. The outbreak is spreading. The scale of the emergency becomes clear. Governments are attempting to respond, but traditional emergency procedures are not enough. Military forces can fight individual outbreaks, but the infected are appearing in enormous numbers. Cities are becoming overwhelmed. Communications are failing. Refugees are moving from one region to another, potentially carrying the infection with them. It becomes a disaster thriller about global systems. Jerry's journey eventually takes him away from the role of frightened father and back into the world of international crisis investigation. He becomes valuable because he is capable of asking the right questions. What causes people to become infected? How quickly does the infection spread? Why do some people appear to be ignored by the infected? Is there a pattern? Can the outbreak be predicted? Can humanity find a weakness? These questions drive the larger story. But emotionally, everything remains connected to Jerry's family. Every investigation he undertakes has one ultimate purpose: returning to Karen and his daughters. This prevents the movie from becoming purely technical. Jerry may be studying the pandemic, but he is still a husband and father. His motivation remains deeply personal. The opening Philadelphia sequence establishes this perfectly. Before Jerry becomes a global investigator again, the audience sees exactly what he is fighting for. He is fighting for ordinary life. He is fighting for his children to wake up safely. He is fighting for his wife to remain beside him. He is fighting for the possibility that one day the family can return to something resembling normality. That is why the sudden outbreak is so devastating. It does not merely threaten people's lives. It destroys their future. The family had planned a peaceful existence, and suddenly the most basic assumptions about tomorrow disappear. There is no certainty that schools will remain open. There is no certainty that hospitals will function. There is no certainty that food will remain available. There is no certainty that roads will remain safe. There is no certainty that governments will survive. And there is certainly no certainty that families will remain together. Jerry understands all of this faster than most people because he has experience recognizing the early stages of societal breakdown. The film also makes the infected frightening through their sheer physical speed. The famous swarm scenes communicate a simple message: you cannot outrun an entire city. A single person may be able to escape one infected attacker. A family may escape a few dozen. But when thousands begin moving together, conventional ideas about escape become meaningless. The infected behave almost like a force of nature. They flood through streets. They overwhelm barriers. They climb. They fall. They get back up. They keep coming. This gives the movie a relentless pace. There is almost never a moment when Jerry can completely relax. Even when he escapes one immediate threat, another problem appears. That constant pressure reflects the movie's broader theme of crisis management. In a genuine global emergency, solving one problem does not necessarily end the crisis. It may simply create the opportunity to confront the next one. Escaping Philadelphia does not end the pandemic. Finding temporary shelter does not end the pandemic. Reaching safety does not end the pandemic. Understanding the infection does not immediately end the pandemic. Jerry must continue adapting. That adaptability becomes his defining quality. He is not the strongest man in the story. He is not the most heavily armed. He does not possess supernatural abilities. He survives because he observes and adapts. His intelligence is practical rather than academic. He looks at what is happening around him and asks what it means. When the infected behave differently from normal human attackers, he notices. When they move towards certain targets, he notices. When they ignore certain people, he notices. When patterns emerge, he remembers them. This makes Jerry's journey feel like an investigation unfolding inside an action movie. Every major encounter provides another piece of information. Every escape teaches him something. Every mistake becomes evidence. The audience therefore experiences the pandemic through Jerry's eyes. At the beginning, nobody understands the threat. Then people realize there is an outbreak. Then they realize traditional responses are failing. Then Jerry begins searching for a biological or behavioral explanation that might provide humanity with a chance. This progression gives the movie its escalating tension. The Philadelphia outbreak is particularly important because it establishes the emotional foundation for everything that follows. Without those early scenes, Jerry's later decisions would not carry the same weight. The audience has already seen him with his family. We have seen his daughters frightened. We have seen Karen depending on him. We have seen Jerry trying to maintain control while the world collapses. Therefore, when he is eventually separated from his family, the separation hurts. His mission is not abstract. Every kilometer he travels is a kilometer away from the people he loves. Every dangerous location he enters creates the possibility that he may never return. Every decision involves a personal cost. The movie's title, World War Z, suggests an enormous historical conflict, and in many ways the film treats the pandemic like a war against humanity itself. But Jerry's personal war begins in a much smaller place. It begins inside a family car. A husband looks at his wife. A father looks at his children. Outside, Philadelphia is collapsing. Inside, Jerry is trying to keep his family alive. That contrast is what makes the opening so effective. The world is becoming enormous, but Jerry's objective remains incredibly simple. Keep them alive. Keep moving. Find safety. Do whatever is necessary. And somehow survive long enough to see them again. The first day of the pandemic also establishes the movie's most unsettling idea: civilization can disappear faster than people expect. A city can look completely normal in the morning and become a battlefield by afternoon. People who were commuting to work suddenly become refugees. Families who were buying groceries suddenly search for shelter. Police officers become overwhelmed. Hospitals become overcrowded. Roads become escape routes. Homes become fortresses. The familiar world becomes unfamiliar. Jerry's previous career has prepared him psychologically for this transformation, but that does not make it easy. He is still terrified. The difference is that fear does not completely control him. He uses it. Fear tells him that something is wrong. Experience tells him what to do next. That combination allows him to function while others freeze. Ultimately, the early portion of World War Z is about the collision between ordinary family life and extraordinary global catastrophe. Jerry Lane thought he had finished with crises. He had chosen his family over his career. He wanted to live quietly. But the pandemic does not care about his plans. When Philadelphia erupts into chaos, Jerry's old instincts return immediately. His ability to assess danger, move through unstable environments, anticipate human behavior, and remain calm under pressure becomes the reason his family survives the first terrible day. The most important thing is that Jerry does not initially see himself as humanity's savior. He is simply a father trying to get his family out. That makes his later transformation into a global crisis investigator much more meaningful. The man who once walked away from dangerous missions is pulled back into them because the world has entered a crisis too large for ordinary people to ignore. And as Jerry watches the infected race through Philadelphia, overwhelm crowds, and transform familiar streets into scenes of terror, he realizes that his peaceful retirement is over. The world needs someone who understands crises. His family needs someone who can survive them. In World War Z, the terrifying thing about the zombie outbreak is not simply that people are becoming infected. The truly frightening realization is that the outbreak is moving faster than governments can understand it. When Jerry Lane first encounters the infected in Philadelphia, he initially focuses on getting his wife Karen and his daughters to safety. His instincts are those of a crisis investigator: observe the situation, identify the threat, find an escape route, and keep moving. But as Jerry watches the infected behave, he begins to recognize something much larger. These are not ordinary violent people. They are not acting randomly. They are moving with astonishing speed and purpose. They attack healthy people almost immediately, and once one person becomes infected, that person joins the growing mass almost instantly. The infected seem to operate according to a powerful collective instinct. They do not need to communicate in any conventional way. They simply move toward living human beings, overwhelm them, and spread the infection. For Jerry, this behavior is the first major clue that the crisis is not confined to Philadelphia. A local disaster can sometimes be contained. A riot can be isolated. A terrorist attack can be surrounded. An epidemic can potentially be quarantined. But what Jerry is seeing does not behave like any of those familiar emergencies. The speed is too great. The transmission is too efficient. The aggression is too intense. And most importantly, the outbreak appears to be appearing in multiple places at roughly the same time. Jerry therefore begins to understand that humanity is facing something far more dangerous than a conventional epidemic. It is a global crisis. The film's use of Jerry's perspective is important because the audience discovers the scale of the disaster gradually. We do not receive a long scientific explanation at the beginning telling us exactly what the infection is. Instead, Jerry observes pieces of evidence and gradually builds a picture. This is exactly what someone with his professional background would do. He does not need to know everything immediately. He needs to identify patterns. The first pattern is speed. The infected do not move like traditional zombies. They sprint. They swarm. They climb over obstacles. They attack in enormous numbers. A single infected person can create another infected person within seconds, which means every encounter can multiply the threat. This creates an almost mathematical nightmare. If one infected person attacks another human being and that victim rapidly becomes infected, the number of attackers increases exponentially. The threat therefore does not merely move. It grows. And it grows while it moves. That is why Jerry realizes that traditional containment methods may be useless. Governments could potentially isolate a disease if people remained in one location and symptoms developed slowly enough to identify infected individuals. But if people can become dangerous within moments and travel across cities before authorities understand what is happening, conventional containment becomes extremely difficult. Jerry's conclusion that this is an extinction-level event is therefore not based on panic. It is based on observation. He has seen how quickly the infected overwhelm people. He has seen how rapidly society breaks down. He knows that the outbreak is not stopping at one city. And he knows that the modern world is connected. Airplanes, ships, roads, airports, military movements, refugees, and international travel provide countless opportunities for an infectious threat to spread. The world that once seemed connected and convenient now becomes the perfect environment for a global pandemic. Jerry's family manages to survive the initial disaster, but his ability to remain with them is temporary. Eventually, his former employer, the United Nations, realizes that his experience could be valuable. Jerry is recalled. This moment represents a major turning point in the movie. The family man who wanted nothing more than a quiet life is suddenly pulled back into international crisis management. Jerry does not want to leave his wife and daughters. His reluctance makes perfect sense. He has already risked his life getting them out of Philadelphia. He knows exactly how dangerous the outside world has become. He also knows that the people he loves are not necessarily safe simply because they are somewhere else. Yet Jerry understands something equally important. If he can help determine how the outbreak works, he may be able to improve his family's chances of survival. His mission is therefore both professional and deeply personal. The UN does not simply send him into the field to fight zombies. They need him to investigate. They need information. They need someone who can travel into dangerous locations and determine what is happening. Where did the outbreak begin? How is it spreading? Why are some places collapsing faster than others? Is there a pattern among the infected? Is there a weakness? Can the outbreak be slowed? The decision to send Jerry there is significant because South Korea represents one of the places where information about the outbreak may still be obtainable. The country has already been devastated by the infected, and Jerry enters a world that is almost completely different from the normal civilization he knew. The South Korean sequence is deliberately bleak. Jerry arrives at a military facility surrounded by fear, uncertainty, and death. The soldiers have experienced the outbreak firsthand, but even they do not completely understand it. This is one of the movie's recurring themes. People have information, but they do not yet have understanding. They have witnessed the infected. They have fought them. They have lost people. But they do not necessarily know why any of it is happening. Jerry listens carefully. He asks questions. He searches for useful information. He understands that even a tiny detail could become important. The atmosphere in South Korea is completely different from Philadelphia. Philadelphia was chaos happening in real time. South Korea is the aftermath. The normal world has already been shattered. The military has tried to establish order, but the threat remains nearby. The survivors are exhausted. Everyone understands that one mistake can bring disaster. Jerry's presence in South Korea demonstrates how his investigation works. He is not searching for a dramatic explanation. He is looking for patterns. He wants to know how the first cases behaved. What happened before the infected appeared? How quickly did they turn? What did witnesses see? Were there unusual patients? Were there unexplained deaths? Did anyone notice anything strange before the outbreak? This is the work of a crisis investigator rather than a traditional action hero. Jerry's mind is constantly connecting pieces of evidence. South Korea also reinforces the idea that the outbreak has moved far beyond the point where ordinary emergency services can handle it. The infected are not simply a threat to individual people. They threaten entire military installations. They threaten national governments. They threaten international stability. And that is why Jerry's mission becomes increasingly urgent. If humanity does not understand the outbreak soon, there may be no organized civilization left to defend. The South Korean investigation does not provide Jerry with a complete answer, but it gives him more information about the behavior of the infected. More importantly, it pushes him toward the idea that the infected are not simply attacking everyone indiscriminately. There may be something more complicated happening. Jerry's investigation eventually takes him to Jerusalem. The Jerusalem sequence is among the most memorable sections of World War Z because the city has taken an extraordinary approach to survival. Unlike many places that were caught completely unprepared, Jerusalem has built enormous defensive walls around itself. The walls are intended to keep the infected outside. Inside the walls, people have created a protected zone. From Jerry's perspective, Jerusalem is fascinating. It represents a rare example of organized preparation. The city has understood that conventional defenses are not enough. It has created a physical barrier between the living and the infected. For a brief period, this strategy appears to work. The walls stand. The infected remain outside. People inside have food, shelter, and organized security. There is a sense that perhaps humanity has finally found a way to resist the outbreak. But World War Z does not allow the audience to relax. The infected are always evolving as a threat. Their numbers outside Jerusalem are enormous. They gather around the walls in massive crowds. At first, the wall seems almost invincible. Then the infected begin climbing over one another. They create enormous piles of bodies. One infected person climbs onto another. Then another climbs on top. The mass becomes a living staircase. Eventually, the infected begin reaching the top of the wall. The image is terrifying because it shows the limitations of human engineering. A wall can stop a human being. It can stop a vehicle. It can stop a small group. But what happens when the enemy does not care about pain, exhaustion, or self-preservation? What happens when millions of bodies can be used as building material? The wall suddenly becomes less like a fortress and more like an obstacle that the infected are attempting to solve. This is where the movie's portrayal of the zombies as a coordinated swarm becomes especially powerful. They do not consciously plan military tactics. But their collective behavior produces something that looks like strategy. They climb. They pile up. They overwhelm. They find the weakest point. And they continue. Jerry witnesses this transformation of the battlefield. Jerusalem's defenses begin to fail. The city's apparent security turns into chaos. The infected enter. People panic. The population begins fleeing. Jerry is forced to move through another collapsing environment, but this time he is also observing something extremely important. He notices that the infected do not attack every person in exactly the same way. Some people appear to be ignored. At first, this seems strange. Why would an infected person suddenly pass someone who appears completely vulnerable? Jerry begins paying closer attention. He notices that certain individuals who appear seriously ill or terminally sick are not being attacked in the same way as healthy people. This is the crucial clue. The infected are not simply seeking human beings. They appear to be seeking healthy human beings. That distinction changes everything. Until this point, the outbreak seems almost unstoppable. The infected attack people because they are alive. But Jerry's observation suggests something more specific. Perhaps the infection does not want just any human host. Perhaps it needs a healthy body. Perhaps the infected instinctively avoid people who are already suffering from severe illnesses because such people may not be useful hosts. This discovery is the beginning of the film's central breakthrough. Jerry does not immediately have the complete answer. He has a hypothesis. And that is enough. This is another important characteristic of his investigation. He does not wait for absolute certainty before acting. In a crisis, waiting for perfect information can be fatal. Instead, he recognizes a possible pattern and begins considering what it could mean. If the infected avoid people who are already seriously ill, perhaps there is a way to make healthy people appear infected with something that the zombie virus considers undesirable. The idea sounds strange. It sounds almost impossible. But the evidence is there. Jerry has seen people who should be obvious targets apparently overlooked. He has seen the infected move past them toward healthier victims. This is not merely a random observation. It could represent humanity's first real defensive advantage. The revelation changes the entire direction of the story. Until now, humanity has been fighting the infected through physical force. Soldiers shoot them. Walls try to keep them out. People run from them. Governments attempt quarantines. But Jerry's discovery suggests a completely different strategy. Instead of defeating the infected physically, perhaps humans can make themselves appear biologically uninteresting to them. That possibility is revolutionary. It also explains why Jerry's investigative skills are more important than brute strength. If he were simply a soldier, he might have concentrated on killing infected individuals. But Jerry is looking for patterns. He is asking why. Why do the infected behave this way? Why do they attack some people but not others? Why do they move so quickly? Why do they swarm? Why do they ignore certain individuals? Each question brings him closer to understanding the enemy. The Jerusalem sequence therefore becomes the intellectual heart of the film. The city is collapsing around Jerry, but inside the chaos he sees something that could potentially save humanity. The irony is powerful. Human civilization seems to be losing one of its great defensive positions, yet the disaster itself gives Jerry the clue he needs to fight back. The fall of Jerusalem is not simply a defeat. It is also a discovery. Jerry's observation becomes even more important because the infected do not appear to possess normal human reasoning. They are driven by instinct. That means their behavior may be predictable. If their instincts cause them to avoid severely ill people, perhaps those instincts can be manipulated. This turns the infected's greatest strength into a potential weakness. Their behavior is highly consistent. Consistency can be studied. And anything that can be studied may eventually be exploited. Jerry now has something that humanity desperately needs, a theory. But the situation remains extremely dangerous. Jerusalem is falling. The walls are being breached. People are fleeing in panic. Jerry must escape while carrying the information he has discovered. The movie does not allow him to sit comfortably and analyze his findings. He has to survive first. This creates a fascinating contrast between Jerry's mind and his surroundings. His brain is working scientifically while the world around him is operating through pure chaos. He is thinking about infection patterns while running for his life. He is considering biological behavior while trying not to be eaten. He is searching for a solution to a global catastrophe while simply trying to stay alive for another few minutes. This is what makes Jerry such an effective protagonist. His courage is not the absence of fear. His courage is continuing to think while terrified. The journey from South Korea to Jerusalem therefore represents the transformation of Jerry's mission. In South Korea, he is searching for information. In Jerusalem, he finds a pattern. That pattern could potentially become a solution. The idea that the infected avoid severely ill or disabled people is particularly important thematically because it introduces a strange reversal. Normally, physical weakness makes a person more vulnerable. In the world of World War Z, certain forms of biological weakness may actually become protective. The healthiest people are the most attractive targets. Those who are already seriously ill may become invisible to the infected. This creates a horrifying irony. The pandemic has turned normal human assumptions upside down. Health becomes danger. Illness becomes protection. Strength becomes vulnerability. And the very characteristics that society normally tries to eliminate may suddenly become useful as a survival mechanism. Jerry recognizes that this could be humanity's best chance. But the movie also emphasizes that recognizing a solution and implementing it are two very different things. A theory must be tested. A treatment must be developed. People must be protected. Governments must cooperate. Supplies must be distributed. And all of this must happen while civilization is collapsing. Jerry therefore becomes a bridge between observation and action. His role is no longer simply to survive. He is carrying information that could change the course of the pandemic. This gives his journey greater significance. When Jerry left his family, he did so because he believed his skills could help humanity understand the crisis. Now he has found a clue that might actually make a difference. But the cost is enormous. He has seen cities fall. He has witnessed people die. He has watched the infected overwhelm defenses that were supposed to be secure. And he has repeatedly placed himself in situations where survival seemed almost impossible. Yet the discovery in Jerusalem gives him something he did not have before. Hope. Not certainty. Not victory. Hope. And in a movie built around global extinction, hope is incredibly powerful. The most frightening part of the outbreak is its apparent perfection. The infected are fast. They are numerous. They are relentless. They spread the disease rapidly. They do not seem to fear death. They do not negotiate. They do not become exhausted in the way normal humans do. They simply continue. But Jerry discovers that perfection has a weakness. The infected are selective. They are looking for suitable hosts. That means they are not completely unstoppable. They follow biological rules. And biological rules can sometimes be manipulated. The journey from Philadelphia to South Korea and then Jerusalem is therefore not merely a sequence of action scenes. It represents Jerry's gradual understanding of the enemy. Philadelphia teaches him how dangerous the infected are. South Korea gives him more evidence about the outbreak. Jerusalem reveals the clue that changes the entire investigation. Together, these experiences transform Jerry from a desperate father into one of humanity's most important investigators. Yet his emotional motivation never disappears. Everything Jerry does is connected to his family. He wants to return to Karen. He wants to see Rachel and Connie again. He wants to believe that the world can become safe enough for them to live normally. That personal motivation keeps the enormous global story grounded. World War Z is ultimately about a civilization trying to understand an enemy that seems impossible to understand. Jerry's greatest contribution is not that he kills countless infected people. It is that he notices something everyone else has overlooked. The infected are not simply attacking humanity randomly. They are selecting their targets according to biological instinct. And once Jerry understands that, the balance of the conflict begins to change. The global outbreak may still be terrifying. Cities may still be falling. Millions may still be in danger. But for the first time, humanity has a clue. By the time Jerry Lane reaches the final stage of his journey in World War Z, he is no longer simply trying to understand why the world is collapsing. He is trying to discover whether humanity can actually fight back. The journey has taken him from the streets of Philadelphia to a devastated military facility in South Korea and then to the enormous walls of Jerusalem. Everywhere he has gone, Jerry has witnessed the same horrifying pattern. Healthy people are attacked, bitten, and transformed into part of the infected swarm. The infection spreads with terrifying speed, and conventional military defenses repeatedly fail. Yet Jerusalem gives Jerry something that changes the entire investigation. A clue. Jerry notices that the infected sometimes ignore people who are already seriously ill or physically compromised. They appear to be searching for suitable hosts rather than simply attacking every living human being indiscriminately. This observation leads Jerry toward a revolutionary theory. Perhaps the infected are not interested in humans simply because they are alive. Perhaps the virus is selecting them. Perhaps it wants a host that is healthy enough to support the infection. And if that is true, then the apparent perfection of the zombie outbreak has a weakness. Jerry begins to think about the infection in biological terms rather than military ones. The infected are terrifying because they are fast, aggressive, and numerous. But underneath that terrifying behavior is still a virus. And viruses have limitations. They need hosts. They need environments in which they can survive and reproduce. Jerry therefore begins asking a completely different question. What if the virus does not attack people who are already too sick to be useful? This idea becomes the foundation of his most dangerous experiment. Before reaching that point, however, Jerry has to survive the collapse of Jerusalem. The city initially appears to represent one of humanity's greatest attempts at survival. Massive walls surround the population, creating a physical barrier between the living and the infected. Inside the walls, people have organized a functioning community while the outside world is being destroyed. For a short time, Jerusalem appears to have discovered the answer. Build a wall. Keep the infected outside. Protect the survivors. But the infected do not behave like a conventional army. They do not become tired. They do not stop because a wall is tall. They do not care about casualties. They simply keep coming. Thousands upon thousands of infected gather around the walls. Then the swarm begins climbing over itself. One infected climbs onto another. Another climbs onto them. Then another. The result is a horrifying tower of bodies. The wall, which was designed to protect humanity, becomes something the infected can overcome by using their sheer numbers. The scene demonstrates one of the film's most important ideas. Human beings often build defenses based on how normal enemies behave. A normal enemy values its own survival. A normal enemy eventually retreats. A normal enemy becomes exhausted. A normal enemy may reconsider an attack after suffering enormous losses. The infected do none of those things. They are driven by instinct. They do not care how many of them die. That makes them extraordinarily difficult to stop. Jerusalem therefore collapses despite its impressive defenses. And yet the destruction of the city gives Jerry the most important piece of information he has received. He sees the infected bypassing certain people. People who appear seriously ill are not treated in exactly the same way as healthy people. That is the moment Jerry begins thinking differently about the outbreak. The virus may be choosing its hosts. It may be seeking healthy bodies because healthy bodies provide better conditions for infection and transmission. The infected are therefore not simply hunters. They are biological selectors. This possibility changes everything. If Jerry is correct, then the infected are not actually trying to kill every human being. They are trying to spread themselves among viable hosts. That distinction creates an opportunity. If someone could make themselves appear biologically unsuitable to the infection, perhaps the infected would ignore them. Jerry does not know whether this theory is correct. He has no laboratory results. He has no controlled experiment. He has only observations gathered in the middle of a collapsing civilization. But Jerry has spent his career making decisions based on incomplete information. And now he has to make perhaps the most dangerous decision of his life. He has to test the theory on himself. This is where the film's climax becomes especially powerful. Jerry eventually reaches a World Health Organization research facility in Wales, associated with the WHO's scientific efforts to understand the outbreak. The facility is located in a highly dangerous environment, surrounded by the consequences of the pandemic. It is not a glamorous laboratory. The researchers are desperately searching for something that can give humanity an advantage. They need to know whether Jerry's idea has scientific value. But Jerry cannot simply explain his theory and walk away. There is a problem. The only way to know whether the theory works is to expose a human being to the condition that Jerry believes the infected avoid. And Jerry volunteers himself. This is a crucial moment because Jerry has already spent much of the movie risking his life for his family. Now he is willing to risk it for the possibility of saving millions. But there is something even more important about the choice. Jerry understands that nobody else should have to make this decision. He is the investigator who discovered the clue. He is the person who believes in the theory. Therefore, he decides that he should be the test subject. The experiment is horrifyingly simple. Jerry takes samples of dangerous pathogens that are already stored in the laboratory. These diseases are potentially lethal, but unlike the zombie infection, they are not immediately transformative. Jerry's plan is essentially to make himself biologically unsuitable. He wants to appear to the infected as someone who is already seriously ill. If the theory is correct, the zombie virus should have no reason to infect him. If the theory is wrong, however, Jerry will be exposed to both the lethal pathogens and the zombie infection. There is no guarantee that he will survive. In fact, the experiment is so dangerous that it is essentially a calculated gamble with his own life. Jerry walks toward the chamber knowing that the smallest mistake could end everything. The scene is powerful because it strips away the large-scale spectacle that dominates much of the movie. There are no enormous crowds. There are no collapsing skyscrapers. There is no military battle. There is only Jerry, a sealed laboratory, dangerous pathogens, and a group of scientists waiting to see whether his theory is correct. The world outside is still collapsing, but the fate of humanity has been reduced to one man sitting inside a room. That is what makes the sequence so tense. Jerry has spent the entire movie running. Now he must wait. He cannot outrun this problem. He cannot shoot it. He cannot hide from it. He has to prove his theory. Jerry injects himself with the pathogens. Almost immediately, the situation becomes terrifying. His body reacts. He becomes sick. He has deliberately created a dangerous condition in his own body. Now comes the most frightening part. Jerry must enter an area where infected people are present. If they attack him, the theory is wrong. If they ignore him, the theory may be correct. But there is no way to know until he tries. Jerry opens the door. The infected are nearby. They are exactly the creatures that have destroyed cities, overwhelmed armies, and turned millions of people into mindless attackers. Normally, their reaction would be immediate. They would rush toward him. They would attack. They would bite. They would transform him. But this time, something different happens. They see Jerry. They approach. And then they stop. The infected do not treat him like a healthy human target. They ignore him. Jerry realizes that his theory may actually be correct. The zombie infection is not interested in him because his body is already carrying lethal diseases. To the infected, Jerry effectively appears to be an unsuitable host. This is the breakthrough. The solution to the zombie pandemic is not a traditional weapon. It is not a stronger wall. It is not a bigger army. It is not simply killing more infected. It is camouflage. Human beings can potentially make themselves invisible to the infected by temporarily creating the biological condition that makes them appear unsuitable. The discovery completely changes the meaning of the earlier events. Jerusalem's fallen defenses suddenly become part of a larger pattern. The people the infected ignored were not ignored randomly. Their bodies were different. Their biological condition made them unattractive to the infection. Jerry has discovered the principle behind that behavior. The infected are still incredibly dangerous. But now humanity understands one of their rules. And understanding a rule is the first step toward exploiting it. The climax works particularly well because Jerry's breakthrough is based on observation rather than brute force. Throughout the film, many people respond to the outbreak with weapons. They shoot. They build walls. They flee. They fight. Jerry does something different. He watches. That is his greatest strength. His previous career as a crisis investigator has trained him to recognize patterns hidden inside chaos. While everyone else sees a mass of terrifying infected people, Jerry asks why they behave the way they do. That question saves humanity. The final experiment also completes Jerry's personal transformation. At the beginning of the film, he is a man who has left crisis work behind. He wants a quiet family life. He has no desire to return to the dangerous world he once inhabited. But the outbreak forces him back into action. At first, he is simply protecting Karen and their daughters. Then he becomes an investigator. Then he becomes an explorer of the outbreak. Finally, he becomes the person willing to gamble his own life to prove the solution. The transformation is not about becoming a superhero. Jerry never suddenly becomes invincible. Instead, he becomes more willing to accept responsibility. He understands that his experience gives him something valuable. He can see connections that others miss. And when that knowledge produces a possible solution, he is willing to test it personally. The experiment also reflects one of the movie's most important themes: survival depends on adaptation. The infected have adapted to human civilization. They exploit crowds. They exploit transportation networks. They exploit human vulnerability. They move faster than traditional systems can respond. Humanity therefore has to adapt as well. Jerry's discovery represents that adaptation. Humans cannot become stronger than the infected physically. They cannot outrun them forever. They cannot build walls high enough to guarantee safety. Instead, they must change the conditions of the conflict. If the infected search for healthy hosts, humans can manipulate what the infected perceive. The battle becomes psychological and biological rather than purely physical. This is a clever reversal. For most of the movie, humans are hiding from the infected. At the end, humanity learns how to hide in plain sight. That is an enormous difference. The infected can still be everywhere. They can still swarm cities. They can still destroy populations. But if humans can move among them without being attacked, survival becomes possible. People can travel. They can rescue others. They can reach supplies. They can organize defenses. They can rebuild. The world is not magically restored. The dead do not return. The destroyed cities do not instantly recover. But humanity has gained something priceless: a strategy. The final laboratory sequence is therefore not merely the moment when Jerry survives. It is the moment when the movie's entire philosophy becomes clear. The infected seem unstoppable because humans initially respond to them in conventional ways. They try to defeat the infected through force. But the virus is a biological system. To defeat a biological system, humans need to understand its behavior. Jerry's theory recognizes that the infected are not random. They have a biological objective. They want hosts that can support the infection. Once that requirement is identified, it becomes possible to exploit it. This also makes the earlier scenes in the movie more meaningful. The infected's extraordinary speed is not just an action movie gimmick. It is part of what makes the pandemic so dangerous. The swarm behavior is not simply there to create spectacular visuals. It demonstrates how quickly the infected can overcome conventional defenses. The collapse of Jerusalem is not simply another disaster. It demonstrates that physical barriers cannot guarantee survival. And the people who are ignored by the infected are not simply lucky. They provide the clue that allows Jerry to understand the virus. Everything comes together in the laboratory. The movie begins with Jerry trying to save his family from a mysterious outbreak. It ends with Jerry deliberately making himself vulnerable to deadly diseases so he can discover whether the infected will ignore him. That is an extraordinary transformation. The man who wanted to escape crisis has become the person willing to walk directly into it. His greatest achievement is not defeating an army. It is discovering a weakness. And that weakness offers humanity a future. There is also a powerful irony in Jerry's experiment. Normally, infection is something people desperately try to avoid. Throughout the movie, being sick is treated as dangerous. But Jerry deliberately makes himself sick because sickness may protect him. This reversal is central to the film's unusual approach to the zombie genre. In most zombie stories, the central goal is to avoid infection. In World War Z, Jerry discovers that another form of infection can potentially provide protection from the zombie infection. The idea creates a strange biological shield. A person appears to the zombie virus as already compromised. The zombie infection therefore moves on to another target. The result is not a cure. That distinction is important. Jerry has not destroyed the virus. He has not cured the infected. He has not eliminated the pandemic. He has discovered a way for humans to become less attractive to it. The infected remain dangerous. The world remains devastated. But survival is now possible. This is why the film's ending is ultimately hopeful without pretending that everything is fixed. The pandemic has changed humanity permanently. Millions have died. Governments have collapsed. Cities have been destroyed. Families have been separated. The old world is gone. But humanity has learned. And learning is the foundation of survival. Jerry's experiment proves that the infected can be studied. They can be understood. Their behavior follows a biological logic. And if their behavior follows rules, humanity can develop strategies against them. That is the real victory. Jerry does not win because he is physically stronger than the infected. He wins because he understands something about them that they cannot understand about him. He discovers that their greatest instinct can become their weakness. They are programmed to seek healthy hosts. Jerry gives himself the appearance of being unsuitable. The infected pass him by. In that moment, the enormous balance of power shifts. The infected still possess overwhelming numbers. But humans now possess knowledge. And knowledge can be more powerful than numbers. The climax also completes the emotional arc involving Jerry's family. His greatest fear throughout the movie has been separation. Every mission takes him farther away from Karen and his daughters. He does not know whether they are safe. He does not know whether he will return. He continues because he believes that understanding the outbreak may eventually give his family a better chance. When the experiment succeeds, his mission has finally produced something tangible. He has found a way for people to survive. That means his sacrifices were not meaningless. His return to crisis work was not simply a repetition of his old life. He has used the skills he once abandoned to create a new possibility for his family and for millions of strangers. Jerry's journey therefore becomes a story about responsibility. Sometimes the life we want is interrupted by circumstances we never chose. Jerry did not choose the pandemic. He did not choose to become a global investigator again. He did not choose to risk his life. But once he recognized that his skills could help, he accepted the responsibility. And in the final experiment, he accepts the ultimate responsibility by risking himself. The laboratory sequence is therefore the perfect conclusion to his character arc. He began as a man trying to escape danger. He ends as a man deliberately entering danger because he believes the answer may be on the other side. The infected may have seemed like the ultimate enemy, fast, relentless, coordinated, and seemingly unstoppable. But Jerry discovers that even an enemy that appears invincible has limitations. The virus needs a host. The infected need healthy bodies. And that biological requirement becomes humanity's opening. The final message of World War Z is therefore not simply that humanity can survive monsters. It is that humanity survives catastrophe through curiosity, observation, adaptation, and cooperation. Jerry does not save the world by becoming the strongest fighter. He saves it by asking the right question. Why do the infected ignore certain people? The answer leads him to a theory. The theory leads him to an experiment. The experiment leads to proof. And the proof gives humanity a strategy. That progression is what makes the ending satisfying. After witnessing Philadelphia collapse, seeing South Korea devastated, and watching Jerusalem's supposedly impenetrable defenses crumble beneath an enormous swarm, Jerry finally discovers that the infected have a weakness. The world has not been saved yet. But for the first time since the outbreak began, humanity is no longer completely defenseless. There is a way to move through the infected world. There is a way to hide. There is a way to survive. And that small discovery transforms the meaning of everything Jerry has endured. The apocalypse is still happening. The infected are still out there. But extinction is no longer inevitable. Humanity has found its first real weapon. Not a gun. Not a missile. Not a wall. By the end of World War Z, Jerry Lane has traveled through a world that has almost completely lost its sense of normality. He began the story as a former United Nations crisis investigator who had deliberately walked away from international emergencies because he wanted something ordinary, a quiet life with his wife and daughters. He wanted to be a husband and father rather than a man constantly surrounded by violence, political instability, and humanitarian disasters. The outbreak destroys that peaceful plan almost immediately. What begins as a confusing series of violent incidents becomes a global catastrophe. Philadelphia collapses into chaos. Governments struggle to understand what is happening. Entire populations are transformed into terrifyingly fast infected attackers. Military forces attempt to respond with conventional weapons, but the scale and speed of the infection make traditional methods increasingly ineffective. Jerry is pulled back into the world he tried to leave behind. At first, his objective is extremely simple. Protect his family. Keep moving. Find somewhere safe. But Jerry's professional instincts quickly return. He begins noticing patterns in the behavior of the infected. He realizes that their speed and swarm behavior make them fundamentally different from the slow zombies traditionally seen in horror stories. More importantly, he begins understanding that the outbreak is not a collection of isolated disasters. It is a global system. And systems can be studied. That realization eventually takes him from Philadelphia to South Korea and then to Jerusalem, where he observes something extraordinary. The infected do not seem equally interested in every human being. They appear to avoid certain people who are already severely ill. That observation becomes the foundation of Jerry's theory. Perhaps the infected are not simply looking for humans. Perhaps the virus is selecting hosts. Perhaps it wants healthy bodies capable of sustaining the infection. If that is true, then Jerry may have found a weakness. But discovering a theory and proving it are completely different things. Jerry eventually reaches a World Health Organization facility and makes an extraordinary decision. He deliberately exposes himself to dangerous pathogens, essentially making his body appear unsuitable to the zombie infection. Then he enters an area containing infected people. The result is astonishing. The infected approach him. They look at him. And they ignore him. Jerry's gamble works. The infected do not attack him because his body now appears to be an unsuitable host. For the first time, humanity has something more valuable than another weapon. It has an idea. It has a defense strategy. And that distinction is essential to understanding the ending of World War Z. Jerry has not cured the world. He has not destroyed the infected. He has not magically restored civilization. He has only opened a door. But that door is enormous. Humanity has been given a fighting chance. The infected are still out there. The cities are still devastated. Millions of people have died. The global order has been shattered. Yet extinction is no longer guaranteed. That is Jerry's victory. And it is also the reason his return to his family carries such emotional weight. Jerry survives. But the man who returns is not exactly the same man who left. He has been changed by everything he has witnessed. He has seen the collapse of cities. He has watched ordinary people transform into monsters. He has witnessed governments struggle to maintain control. He has seen military defenses fail. He has watched Jerusalem's enormous walls become useless against the infected swarm. He has spent days moving through environments where death could come from almost anywhere. He has also learned something about himself. The quiet family life he wanted was never necessarily a rejection of who he was. It was a desire to protect the people he loved. That distinction becomes clearer by the end. Jerry thought he had left crisis work because he wanted normality. But perhaps the deeper truth is that he wanted to create a safe world for his family. When that world disappeared, his old skills became necessary again. His analytical mind, his experience, his ability to stay calm, and his understanding of crisis behavior all became tools for protecting the people he loved. That creates the central duality of Jerry Lane. He is both an analyst and a father. He is both battle-hardened and deeply emotional. He is capable of looking at the infected as a biological phenomenon while simultaneously thinking about his children. These two sides of his personality constantly compete with one another. The professional Jerry understands that information must be gathered. The father Jerry wants to go home. The investigator wants to continue the mission. The husband wants to be reunited with Karen. The crisis specialist knows that humanity needs answers. The father knows that his daughters need him. This tension makes Jerry more interesting than a conventional action hero. He is not someone who enjoys danger. He is someone who accepts danger when he believes there is no other choice. That difference is extremely important. The gamble that changes everything. The laboratory experiment is the ultimate expression of Jerry's character. This is not reckless heroism. It is calculated desperation. Jerry knows the pathogens could kill him. He also knows that if his theory is wrong, the infected could attack him. The experiment therefore contains two possible deaths. He could die from the diseases he has deliberately introduced into his body. Or he could be infected by the zombies. Either way, there is no guarantee that he will walk out alive. The tension comes from the fact that Jerry is not certain. He believes. But belief is not proof. He has to take the final step. When the infected ignore him, the entire story changes. For Jerry, it is a moment of enormous relief. For humanity, it is potentially the beginning of a new era. The infected have a weakness. They are not omniscient. They are not simply attacking every person they see. They are following biological instincts. And those instincts can be manipulated. This is why the movie's central victory is intellectual rather than physical. Jerry does not defeat the infected in combat. He defeats their advantage by understanding it. Why firepower was never enough. One of the most important ideas in World War Z is the limitation of conventional force. When the outbreak begins, the natural human response is to fight. Police use weapons. Military forces deploy. Soldiers establish defensive positions. Governments attempt to create secure areas. The assumption is simple: if the enemy is dangerous, increase firepower. But the infected change the equation. They are too numerous. They move too quickly. They do not fear death. They do not retreat. They can turn one human being into another attacker almost immediately. A gun can kill an infected person. But what happens when thousands are rushing toward you? What happens when the infected are climbing over one another? What happens when the enemy does not care about casualties? What happens when every person you fail to stop can become another attacker? The answer is that firepower alone cannot solve the problem. The movie demonstrates this repeatedly. Military strength can slow the infected. Walls can delay them. Weapons can kill them. But none of these solutions addresses the underlying mechanism of the infection. Jerry does. He asks why the infected behave as they do. That question is more valuable than another weapon. This is the central intellectual message of the movie. Humanity's greatest advantage is not necessarily physical strength. It is the ability to observe, reason, experiment, and adapt. The infected have speed. Humans have intelligence. The infected have numbers. Humans have scientific knowledge. The infected have instinct. Humans can understand instinct. Jerry represents that human advantage. Jerry as the crisis analyst. Jerry's previous career as a UN crisis investigator is not simply a background detail. It explains why he is able to function when the world around him becomes chaotic. A crisis investigator must be able to distinguish important information from meaningless noise. That is exactly what Jerry does. When everyone else sees panic, he sees patterns. When people are running randomly, he thinks about routes. When governments are reacting emotionally, he considers probabilities. When soldiers focus on killing infected people, Jerry asks why the infected behave differently toward certain individuals. This makes his character unusual. He is not primarily a warrior. He is an interpreter. He interprets crises. He interprets behavior. He interprets evidence. He turns observations into hypotheses. And eventually, he turns a hypothesis into a survival strategy. This is why his victory feels earned. The solution does not suddenly appear from nowhere. It grows out of everything he has learned. Philadelphia teaches him how fast the infected can spread. South Korea provides additional evidence about the outbreak. Jerusalem reveals that the infected may avoid certain hosts. The laboratory allows Jerry to test the theory. Each stage builds toward the next. His success is therefore the result of cumulative observation. The father behind the analyst. But Jerry's intellectual ability is only one side of his character. The other side is the father. This is what gives the movie emotional depth. Jerry does not initially return to crisis work because he wants excitement. He returns because his family is threatened. Even after he becomes involved in the global investigation, he continues thinking about Karen and his daughters. Every dangerous mission carries the possibility that he will never see them again. That fear is constantly present. Jerry is not trying to save humanity because he has suddenly become obsessed with heroism. He wants humanity to survive because his family exists within that humanity. The global and personal stories are therefore connected. Saving the world means giving his daughters a future. Finding a defense means giving his family another chance. Surviving means getting home. The enormous scale of the pandemic is constantly brought back to this intimate motivation. Jerry is not fighting for an abstract civilization. He is fighting for people. That is why his return to his family matters so much. Returning home. After the laboratory breakthrough, Jerry is finally able to make contact with the people he loves. The emotional significance of this moment is enormous. For much of the movie, Jerry has been separated from Karen and the girls. He does not know whether they are safe. They do not know whether he is alive. The family has been divided by the catastrophe. The possibility of reunion has therefore become one of Jerry's strongest motivations. When he eventually returns, the moment is not presented as a triumphant superhero celebration. There is no sense that everything has suddenly become normal. The world is still damaged. The pandemic is still present. Humanity is still fighting. But Jerry is alive. His family is alive. And there is now hope? That is enough. The movie's ending is deliberately modest compared with the enormous scale of the disaster. Jerry does not walk into a completely restored world. He walks back toward his family carrying knowledge. That knowledge may save countless lives. And that gives his survival meaning. Jerry is irrevocably changed. Although Jerry returns alive, the experiences he has endured cannot simply disappear. He has seen too much. He has been forced to confront the fragility of civilization. Before the outbreak, ordinary life seemed permanent. A family could go shopping. But Jerry has learned how quickly all of these assumptions can collapse. He has also learned that survival sometimes requires choices that ordinary life would make unthinkable. He deliberately infected himself with deadly diseases. He entered rooms containing infected people. He traveled through collapsing cities. He witnessed people die. He accepted that his own survival might be necessary for the survival of others. Those experiences change a person. Jerry cannot simply forget them. Even when he is reunited with his family, part of him remains the crisis investigator. He will probably always scan crowds. He will notice exits. He will evaluate unusual behavior. He will remember the sound of people running. He will remember Jerusalem. He will remember the infected. The normal life he wanted may never feel completely normal again. That is the emotional cost of survival. The meaning of A Fighting Chance. The movie's ending is hopeful, but it is not a traditional happy ending. Humanity has not won the war. It has discovered how to fight. That is a significant difference. A cure would mean the crisis is essentially over. A perfect weapon would mean the enemy can be defeated. Jerry finds neither. He finds a way to make humans less attractive to the infection. That means the world still has enormous problems. People still have to distribute the defense strategy. Scientists still have to develop appropriate medical applications. Governments still have to rebuild. Communities still have to survive. The infected still exist. The dead remain dead. Civilization still has to recover. But the situation is no longer hopeless. Humanity now knows something about its enemy. That knowledge gives survivors the possibility of moving through infected territory, rescuing people, rebuilding communities, and eventually reclaiming parts of the world. This is why A Fighting Chance is such an appropriate way to describe the conclusion. Jerry does not save humanity by himself. He gives humanity information that may allow it to save itself. That distinction makes his achievement more meaningful. Intelligence versus instinct. The contrast between humans and infected people is also central to the movie. The infected operate through instinct. They see. They pursue. They attack. They spread. They do not appear to question their behavior. Humanity, on the other hand, has the ability to question. Why is this happening? How does it work? What causes it? Can we predict it? Can we exploit it? Jerry's entire journey is an expression of those questions. The infected are powerful because they act without hesitation. Humans are powerful because they can think before acting. The movie therefore presents intelligence as humanity's most important survival tool. This does not mean guns are useless. Military power still matters. Walls still matter. Physical defenses still matter. But none of them can replace understanding. The breakthrough comes when someone stops asking, "How do we kill them?" and starts asking, "Why do they behave this way?" That change in perspective is Jerry's greatest contribution. Jerry's dual identity. Jerry Lane can almost be viewed as two people living inside one character. There is the professional Jerry. He is calm, analytical, observant, prepared, comfortable with uncertainty. He can enter dangerous environments and search for evidence. He can make decisions while surrounded by chaos. Then there is family Jerry. He is affectionate, protective, frightened, emotionally vulnerable. He worries about his daughters. He worries about Karen. He wants ordinary evenings and ordinary conversations. These two versions of Jerry are not actually opposites. They strengthen one another. His professional abilities help him protect his family. His love for his family gives his professional mission meaning. Without his analytical mind, he might not survive. Without his family motivation, he might not have the reason to continue. That is what makes his character work. He is not simply a cold scientist. He is not simply a protective father. He is both. Why Jerry does not feel like a traditional action hero. Many action heroes are defined by physical superiority. They can fight better than everyone else. They can shoot accurately. They can survive impossible battles. Jerry is different. His most important victories happen inside his mind. He observes. He predicts. He adapts. He investigates. Even when he participates in action sequences, his survival often depends on making the right decision rather than overpowering his enemies. That makes him more believable. Jerry can be frightened. Jerry can be injured. Jerry can make mistakes. He can be overwhelmed. But he keeps thinking. That is his superpower. The broader theme of adaptation. The movie ultimately argues that survival belongs to those who can adapt. The infected are an extreme form of adaptation. They spread quickly. They overwhelm defenses. They exploit human weaknesses. Humanity must adapt in response. Jerry represents that adaptation. At first, he thinks like a father trying to escape. Then he thinks like a crisis investigator. Then he begins thinking like a scientist. Finally, he becomes the bridge between those worlds. His discovery proves that survival does not always require defeating the threat directly. Sometimes survival means understanding how the threat sees you. That is a surprisingly sophisticated idea for a large-scale action thriller. The emotional victory. Jerry's greatest victory is ultimately not defeating the infected. It is returning to his family. The entire journey has been driven by that desire. When he was separated from Karen and his daughters, there was always a possibility that the mission could become meaningless. What good is saving millions if Jerry loses the people he loves? But the final reunion gives his journey emotional closure. He has not abandoned his family. He has protected them in the only way he knew how. And now he can finally return. He is alive. They are alive. There is hope. But Jerry is also changed. He has discovered that normality can vanish overnight. He has learned that survival requires constant attention. He has seen the worst of humanity and the best of it. He has witnessed fear, selfishness, courage, sacrifice, intelligence, and cooperation. The world he returns to is not the world he left. And Jerry himself is not the man who left it. Final meaning of Jerry Lane's journey. Jerry's story in World War Z can ultimately be understood as a journey from protection to understanding. At the beginning, he protects his family by physically moving them away from danger. Later, he protects humanity by investigating the source and behavior of the outbreak. Finally, he protects both by discovering a way to make humans less vulnerable to the infected. His journey demonstrates that courage is not always about standing in front of an enemy with a weapon. Sometimes courage means entering a laboratory and deliberately risking your own life because you believe an idea might work. Sometimes intelligence means noticing the detail everyone else ignored. Sometimes survival means accepting that the old rules no longer apply. And sometimes hope begins with a single observation. Jerry notices that the infected avoid certain people. He asks why. That question becomes a theory. The theory becomes an experiment. The experiment becomes proof. And the proof becomes humanity's first real defense. That is why the ending of World War Z feels victorious without pretending that the war is over. The world is still broken. The infected still exist. The dead cannot be brought back. Humanity still faces an enormous struggle. But extinction is no longer inevitable. People have learned how to fight back. And Jerry Lane has played a crucial role in giving them that opportunity. His final victory is therefore not the destruction of the enemy. It is the discovery of a way to survive the enemy. That distinction captures the heart of the movie. Humanity survives not because it is stronger than the catastrophe, but because it can learn from it. Jerry's greatest weapon is his mind. His greatest motivation is his family. His greatest achievement is understanding the enemy. The ending of World War Z is often remembered as a moment of hope. Jerry Lane discovers that the infected can be avoided if a person carries another serious illness, and this discovery gives humanity a possible defense against the pandemic. He survives the laboratory experiment, returns to his family, and the film closes on the idea that humanity finally has a fighting chance. But there is another way to understand Jerry's ending. He may have survived physically, but he has not returned to the person he was before the outbreak. The Jerry Lane who wanted a peaceful family life at the beginning of the movie is gone. In his place is a man who has experienced extreme danger, witnessed mass death, traveled through collapsing societies, watched supposedly secure cities fall, and deliberately placed his own life in the hands of a desperate medical experiment. The film does not spend much time showing Jerry's life after the crisis, but the experiences he has endured suggest a profound psychological transformation. His body may be standing safely beside his family, yet his mind is still partly living in the world of the outbreak. This makes his story more complicated than a simple hero's journey. Jerry wins. But he does not escape unchanged. His survival comes with a psychological price. One of the clearest ways to understand this price is through hypervigilance. Jerry has spent the entire film learning that danger can appear without warning. Philadelphia taught him that an ordinary street can become a battlefield in seconds. South Korea taught him that even a seemingly secure military environment can hide deadly threats. Jerusalem taught him that enormous defensive walls can collapse under the pressure of the infected. And the laboratory taught him something even more intimate. His own body can become a battlefield. After experiencing all of this, it would be almost impossible for Jerry to simply return to normal life and behave as though nothing happened. He would probably continue scanning rooms. He would notice exits. He would watch crowds. He would evaluate strangers. He would instinctively consider how quickly an emergency could develop. A restaurant would not simply be a restaurant anymore. It would have doors, windows, crowds, potential escape routes, possible choke points. A supermarket would not simply be a place to buy food. Jerry would notice how many people were inside, where the aisles were, where the entrances were, and how easily people could become trapped if panic suddenly erupted. Even his own neighborhood could begin to look like a miniature crisis zone. This is the psychological legacy of the outbreak. Jerry has learned that ordinary environments can become dangerous without warning. A man who cannot completely switch off. Before the pandemic, Jerry had already worked in crisis situations, so he was accustomed to evaluating danger. But there is an important difference between professional awareness and personal trauma. A crisis investigator can leave a dangerous environment. Jerry cannot leave his memories. He has experienced danger so frequently that his mind has learned to remain alert even when there is no immediate threat. Imagine Jerry sitting quietly at home. Everything appears normal. His family is safe. The lights are on. The doors are locked. There are no infected outside. But his brain may still be asking questions. What if something happens? Where is the nearest exit? What would happen if the neighborhood suddenly had to evacuate? How quickly could the family get into the car? Where are the children? Is that noise outside normal? Why is that person behaving strangely? These thoughts may not even be conscious. They can become habits. That is what makes trauma so powerful. A person does not have to actively remember the disaster every second for the disaster to continue affecting them. The body learns. The mind learns. The nervous system learns. Jerry has spent so much time reacting to threats that peaceful surroundings may initially feel almost unnatural. The absence of danger does not necessarily feel like safety. It can feel like waiting. The kitchen knife and the changed meaning of ordinary objects. One of the most interesting ways to imagine Jerry's psychological transformation is through ordinary objects. A kitchen knife, for example, used to be exactly what it sounds like, a tool for preparing food. After the outbreak, Jerry's relationship with such an object can change. His hands have learned how to hold objects defensively. His brain has learned to distinguish between a harmless tool and something that could become a weapon. He may pick up a knife while preparing dinner and instinctively grip it in a way that reflects his survival training. That small gesture would reveal an enormous psychological change. The world has taught him to look at ordinary objects through the lens of survival. A chair is no longer only furniture. It could become a barrier. A door is not only a doorway. It is a potential defensive point. A car is not simply transportation. It is an escape mechanism. A flashlight is not merely useful during a power outage. It becomes part of an emergency kit. A crowded staircase is not simply a staircase. It is a potential trap. Jerry's mind has been reorganized around threat assessment. And that is difficult to switch off. Restless sleep. Sleep would probably be another major problem for Jerry. During the outbreak, sleep is dangerous. Every moment of unconsciousness creates vulnerability. He has spent days surrounded by screaming crowds, gunfire, infected attackers, emergency alarms, and uncertainty. His body may eventually reach safety, but his nervous system may continue expecting danger. That can lead to restless sleep. He might wake suddenly after hearing a strange sound. He might dream about the infected swarming through Jerusalem. He might relive the chaos of Philadelphia. He might remember the moment he entered the laboratory knowing that the experiment could kill him. He might wake up and immediately check whether his family is there. That final behavior is particularly important. Jerry's greatest fear throughout the movie is separation from his family. So even after returning home, he may instinctively check on them. Is Karen there? Are the girls sleeping safely? Are the doors locked? Is everything quiet? The family has survived. But Jerry's mind may still be living according to the rules of the apocalypse. His neighborhood becomes a threat assessment zone. Perhaps the most revealing consequence of Jerry's experiences would be the way he sees his own neighborhood. Before the outbreak, a neighborhood is associated with comfort. Neighbors, homes, children playing, cars parked on streets, ordinary routines. After Jerry's experiences, those same features can look different. He may unconsciously assess the neighborhood whenever he walks through it. How many people are outside? Are there unusual crowds? Which streets lead out? Which buildings have secure entrances? Where could the family shelter? How far is the nearest hospital? What would happen if communication suddenly failed? These are not irrational questions for someone who has survived what Jerry has survived. In fact, they are probably part of what made him successful during the crisis. But the same mental ability that saved his life can become difficult to turn off. This creates a fascinating contradiction. The skill that makes Jerry an excellent survivor can make ordinary life psychologically difficult. During the outbreak, constant vigilance was useful. After the outbreak, constant vigilance may become exhausting. The marriage of two survivors. Jerry's relationship with Karen also changes. Before the pandemic, their marriage is presented as a family relationship built around ordinary domestic life. They are parents. They share responsibilities. Jerry has left his dangerous career partly because he wants to be with them. But the outbreak transforms their relationship. They are no longer simply husband and wife. They are survivors. They have experienced the same catastrophe. They have feared for each other's lives. They have been separated. They have waited for each other. They have had to make decisions under impossible circumstances. That shared experience creates a bond that may be difficult to explain to anyone else. This is why their relationship after the crisis can be understood as a quiet partnership of survivors. They may not need to explain everything to one another. A look can communicate fear. A silence can communicate understanding. A hand on the shoulder can mean, I'm here. A glance toward the children can mean, are they safe? They have been through something so extreme that ordinary words may seem inadequate. Their marriage becomes less about romantic speeches and more about shared recognition. They know what the other person has endured. They know what fear looks like. They know what exhaustion looks like. They know what it means to wait for a loved one who might never return. That shared knowledge creates an almost wordless intimacy. Silence as communication. The idea of silence is particularly important. Before the outbreak, couples can talk about ordinary problems. Bills, work, children, plans, schedules. But after surviving an apocalypse, there are memories that may not need explanation. Jerry does not have to tell Karen every time he wakes from a nightmare. She may already understand. Karen does not have to explain why she becomes nervous around large crowds. Jerry knows. Their communication becomes compressed because they have shared experiences that would take hours to describe to someone else. A simple look can carry the emotional weight of an entire conversation. This is not necessarily a sign that their marriage has become colder. It can actually indicate the opposite. They understand one another more deeply because they have been through something together that few people could understand. Their marriage becomes a partnership built on survival. They have learned that being together is not something to take for granted. Survivor's guilt. Another major psychological burden Jerry would carry is survivor's guilt. Jerry survives. Millions do not. That fact alone can create an enormous emotional burden. Throughout his journey, Jerry sees people who do not survive. He encounters families separated by chaos. He sees soldiers die. He watches civilians become infected. He sees cities overwhelmed. He witnesses people who were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. And then he walks away. Eventually, he returns to his family alive. But survival can create a painful question. Why me? Why did Jerry survive when so many others did not? Why did his daughter survive? Why did Karen survive? Why did he find the clue? Why did his experiment work? Why was he the person who happened to notice what others missed? These questions can remain even when someone has done nothing wrong. Survivor's guilt does not necessarily mean believing that one should have died. It can simply mean feeling uncomfortable with the fact that you lived while others did not. Jerry's survival is especially complicated because he knows that his actions may eventually save millions. That gives his survival meaning. But meaning does not erase grief. The people who died still died. The families who were destroyed cannot simply be restored. The cities that fell cannot instantly return to normal. Jerry may therefore feel grateful and guilty at the same time. He can be happy to see his family and still mourn the people he could not save. He can be proud of his breakthrough and still wonder whether it came too late. He can feel hopeful and terrified simultaneously. That emotional contradiction makes his character more human. Was the breakthrough really a victory? Another haunting question follows Jerry home. Did he actually win? The movie presents his discovery as a breakthrough, but it does not mean the pandemic has been completely defeated. The infected still exist. The world is still damaged. Humanity still has to implement the discovery. The solution requires organization, science, medicine, logistics, and cooperation. Jerry therefore cannot know with absolute certainty what will happen next. Maybe his discovery will save humanity. Maybe it will only slow the pandemic. Maybe governments will fail to distribute the treatment. Maybe new complications will appear. Maybe the infected will eventually adapt. Maybe the solution will not work in every circumstance. This uncertainty can be psychologically difficult. Jerry has been trained to think in terms of risk. He knows that one successful experiment does not guarantee global success. A scientist might celebrate a breakthrough. A crisis investigator immediately asks what could go wrong next. That mentality is deeply embedded in Jerry. So even when everyone else begins celebrating, Jerry may remain cautious. He knows that the fight is not necessarily over. The fear of false hope. Jerry's discovery is hopeful, but hope itself can become frightening. What if people believe they are safe and become careless? What if the treatment is misunderstood? What if someone assumes the infected are no longer dangerous? What if the strategy works in a laboratory but fails somewhere else? Jerry has seen what happens when people underestimate the outbreak. Jerusalem is a perfect example. The city believed its walls provided security. Then the walls failed. That experience would make Jerry skeptical of absolute safety. He has learned that every defense has limitations. Therefore, even after finding a defense, he might still remain alert. He does not believe in perfect security anymore. He believes in preparedness. The psychology of the survivor. Jerry's psychological transformation reflects a broader truth about survival stories. Survival does not end when the immediate danger disappears. The body can escape. The mind takes longer. A person can leave the battlefield while still carrying the battlefield inside. Jerry's experiences have changed his instincts. He may no longer be able to look at crowds innocently. He may no longer sleep as peacefully. He may always keep an emergency plan in his head. He may instinctively locate exits. He may become uncomfortable when his children are out of sight. These behaviors are understandable because they once kept him alive. The problem is that survival instincts do not always know when the danger has ended. Jerry's mind may continue operating as though the next emergency is only seconds away. The father who watches the children. His daughters become especially important in understanding this. At the beginning of the movie, Jerry wants to give them a normal childhood. After the outbreak, normal childhood becomes almost impossible. He has seen children endangered by the infected. He knows how quickly situations can collapse. As a result, his protective instincts may become even stronger. He may watch his daughters more closely. He may worry when they leave the house. He may teach them emergency procedures. He may want them to know where the exits are. He may encourage them to recognize unusual behavior. Some of this is useful. But too much vigilance can become a burden. Jerry has to learn that protecting his children also means allowing them to live. That may be one of his hardest post-outbreak challenges. The old Jerry wanted his daughters to have freedom. The new Jerry knows exactly how fragile freedom can be. A marriage built on shared trauma. Karen's role becomes important here because she is one of the few people who can help Jerry balance these two versions of himself. She knows the old Jerry. She also knows the Jerry who came back from the outbreak. She understands what he has seen. She knows why he checks the doors. She understands why crowds make him uncomfortable. She knows why he wakes suddenly. And she may be one of the only people who can gently remind him that he is home. Their marriage therefore becomes a place where Jerry can slowly lower his defenses. He does not have to be the crisis investigator every second. He can be a husband. He can be a father. He can sit quietly. He can breathe. He can remember that not every sound is a threat. This makes their relationship more than a romantic subplot. It becomes part of Jerry's recovery. The difference between survival and living. This distinction is perhaps the most important psychological theme. During the outbreak, Jerry's objective is survival. Eat, move, hide, escape, observe, protect, repeat. But after the crisis, survival cannot remain the only goal. A person needs to live. Jerry must eventually learn to move from constant survival mode back toward ordinary life. That does not mean forgetting. It means learning how to remember without being controlled by the memories. He cannot erase Philadelphia. He cannot erase Jerusalem. He cannot erase the laboratory. But he can decide what those experiences mean. Instead of allowing them to convince him that danger is everywhere, he can use them as reminders of why ordinary life matters. A family dinner becomes valuable because he knows how easily it could have disappeared. A quiet night becomes meaningful because he remembers sleepless nights surrounded by danger. His daughter's laughing becomes precious because he remembers how uncertain their survival once was. The apocalypse has made normal life more valuable. Jerry's greatest transformation. At the beginning of World War Z, Jerry believes that leaving crisis work will allow him to protect his family. By the end, he realizes that his crisis skills are part of how he protects them. But there is another lesson. He cannot protect them from everything. That is perhaps the hardest truth for a father like Jerry. He can plan. He can observe. He can prepare. He can react. But he cannot control the entire world. The pandemic teaches him that certainty is impossible. His family survived, but there were moments when he had no guarantee they would. His breakthrough worked, but he cannot guarantee that the future will be safe. He returned home, but the world remains damaged. Jerry must therefore learn to live with uncertainty. That may be harder for him than fighting the infected. Hope mixed with fear. The ending of World War Z works because hope and fear exist simultaneously. Humanity has a defense. But humanity is not safe yet. Jerry is alive. But he is psychologically changed. His family is together. But the world they knew is gone. The infection can potentially be managed. But it has not simply disappeared. This uncertainty makes the ending more realistic emotionally. A perfect Hollywood victory would have shown the infected being destroyed and civilization instantly restored. Instead, the movie gives Jerry something smaller and more believable. A chance. And for someone who has seen the world almost end, a chance is enormous. The quiet heroism of Jerry Lane. Jerry's heroism is therefore not really about how many infected people he kills. It is about how much he is willing to understand. He watches when others panic. He investigates when others guess. He questions when others accept assumptions. He experiments when others are afraid. And finally, he risks himself because he believes the answer might help everyone else. His victory is intellectual. But it is also deeply emotional. He does not seek knowledge for its own sake. He seeks it because people he loves are in danger. His mind and his heart work together. The analyst finds the answer. The father gives him a reason to keep searching. Final meaning. Jerry Lane's story ends with a strange combination of victory and vulnerability. He has survived the apocalypse, but he has not escaped its psychological consequences. He may continue scanning rooms. He may instinctively assess crowds. He may handle ordinary objects with the reflexes of someone who has learned to survive. He may sleep restlessly. He may look at his neighborhood differently. He may worry about his family even when there is no immediate danger. And he may carry the memories of people who were not as fortunate as he was. But those scars do not make his survival meaningless. They make it meaningful. Jerry's trauma is evidence of what he endured. His hypervigilance shows how deeply the crisis changed him. His survivor's guilt reminds him of the lives lost. His cautiousness reflects the uncertainty he can never completely escape. And his relationship with Karen becomes a quiet reminder that he does not have to carry those memories alone. They have become partners not merely in marriage, but in survival. They understand that the old world is gone. They understand that they have been changed. And they understand that simply being together is itself a victory. The greatest irony of Jerry's story is that he wanted to return to normal life, yet after everything he has experienced, normal life can never mean exactly what it meant before. He has learned too much. He has seen too much. He has survived too much. But perhaps that is not necessarily a tragedy. His new awareness can also make him appreciate what he once took for granted. A quiet home. His wife's presence. His children's laughter. An ordinary meal. A peaceful night. These things no longer seem boring. They seem extraordinary. Jerry has discovered that civilization is fragile, but he has also discovered that human beings are remarkably adaptable. He has seen fear spread. But he has also seen courage. He has seen people panic. But he has also seen people cooperate. He has seen cities fall. But he has also helped create the possibility of rebuilding. And that is ultimately the deeper message of World War Z. Humanity does not survive because it is invulnerable. It survives because it can learn. Jerry survives because he observes. He survives because he adapts. He survives because he is willing to question what everyone else assumes. And he returns to his family because, beneath all the analytical thinking and crisis experience, he remains the same man who wanted one simple thing from the beginning. At the end of World War Z, Jerry Lane has accomplished something extraordinary. He has survived a worldwide catastrophe, traveled through collapsing regions, investigated the behavior of the infected, discovered a crucial weakness, and personally tested a theory that could give humanity a way to survive. Yet his victory is deliberately incomplete. The infected have not disappeared. The destroyed cities have not magically returned to normal. The millions who died cannot be brought back. The governments and communities that collapsed cannot simply be reconstructed overnight. Jerry has not found a magical button that ends the apocalypse. Instead, he has discovered a way for humanity to fight back. That distinction is essential to understanding what his victory means. Jerry does not return home believing that everything is finally safe. If anything, the experience has permanently changed his definition of safety. Before the pandemic, safety meant living an ordinary life. It meant being able to drive through a city without thinking about escape routes. It meant allowing children to play outside without constantly calculating possible threats. It meant going to a restaurant without wondering how quickly the room could be evacuated. It meant sleeping without listening for unusual noises. It meant trusting that hospitals, police, governments, transportation systems, and communication networks would continue functioning tomorrow. The outbreak destroys that assumption. Jerry learns that civilization is not an automatic condition. It is something people build and maintain. And because it can be built, it can also collapse. That realization becomes the foundation of his new worldview. Scientists need to understand it. Medical systems need to use it. Governments need to distribute it. People need to cooperate. Survivors need to be educated. Communities need to rebuild. There are countless ways for a good discovery to fail when societies are under extreme pressure. Jerry understands this better than most people. His entire professional background has taught him that crises rarely have simple endings. A crisis can appear to be solved and then return in another form. A military victory can create political instability. A disaster can reveal new vulnerabilities. A temporary solution can create new problems. That experience prevents Jerry from becoming excessively optimistic. He has found a weapon against the infected, but he does not believe the world has suddenly become safe. This is why the idea of a fighting chance is more appropriate than the idea of complete victory. Humanity has gained an advantage. But the war is not automatically over. The question that never completely leaves Jerry. One of the most interesting possibilities in Jerry's post-outbreak life is that he may continue asking himself a disturbing question. Was this actually a triumph? Or did humanity simply delay the inevitable? The movie strongly suggests that Jerry's discovery works, but a person like Jerry would understand uncertainty. He has seen how quickly situations can change. He has watched supposedly secure defenses collapse. Jerusalem's enormous walls seemed to provide protection, but the infected eventually overwhelmed them. That experience would remain in Jerry's memory. He would understand that today's solution does not necessarily guarantee tomorrow's safety. Perhaps the treatment will work. Perhaps people will rebuild. Perhaps the infected population will gradually become manageable. But Jerry has no reason to believe that civilization can ever again be considered completely secure. He has seen the boundary between normality and disaster. And once someone has seen that boundary, it is difficult to forget how thin it actually is. The porous boundary between order and collapse. This becomes the central idea behind Jerry's new worldview. Before the pandemic, Jerry could look at a functioning city and assume that the order around him was permanent. There were traffic lights, hospitals, police stations, schools, airports, government buildings, supermarkets, roads, electricity, communication, millions of people performing their jobs every day. All of these systems created the appearance of permanence. But the pandemic reveals something different. These systems are interconnected. They depend on people continuing to cooperate. They depend on infrastructure remaining operational. They depend on trust. They depend on information. They depend on people believing that tomorrow will resemble today. Remove enough of those assumptions and the entire structure can become unstable. That is what Jerry sees in Philadelphia. A traffic jam is no longer just a traffic jam. It becomes a potential trap. A crowd is no longer simply a group of people. It becomes a possible transmission event. A hospital is no longer simply a place of healing. It can become the center of infection. A highway is no longer just transportation. This is the porous boundary between order and collapse. The difference between a functioning city and a disaster zone may be much smaller than people imagine. Jerry learns that civilization is not a solid wall. It is more like a thin surface. Underneath it are fear, uncertainty, competition, and the possibility of chaos. Most of the time, ordinary life keeps those forces under control. But when a sufficiently large crisis appears, the surface can crack. And once it cracks, collapse can move extremely quickly. Why Jerry avoids public recognition? A conventional action hero might return home as a celebrated figure. Governments might honor him. News organizations might call him a hero. Politicians might praise his courage. His name could become associated with the discovery that helped humanity survive. But Jerry is not really built for that kind of recognition. His personality is quieter. He has never been motivated primarily by fame. His goal was always survival and protection. He did not investigate the outbreak because he wanted his name remembered. He did it because people were dying. He did not enter the laboratory because he wanted to become a legend. He did it because someone needed to test the theory. And he does not return home looking for applause. For Jerry, public recognition may even feel uncomfortable. How could he celebrate when so many people died? How could he enjoy being called a hero when he knows how many families were destroyed? How could he feel completely victorious when the world is still recovering? His modesty therefore has a psychological explanation. Jerry knows that survival was partly skill, partly circumstance, and partly luck. He was in the right place to observe certain clues. He survived situations where others did not. His experiment happened to work. His family survived. That does not necessarily make him feel superior to those who died. It may make him more aware of how fragile survival really is. From hero to mentor. Instead of seeking recognition, Jerry's more meaningful contribution may become teaching others. His greatest skill is not simply knowing how to fight. It is knowing how to observe. He understands situational awareness. He understands how quickly a normal environment can become dangerous. He understands how crowds behave under pressure. He understands the importance of exits. He understands how panic spreads. He understands that information is often more valuable than weapons. These are lessons that can be passed on. Jerry could teach people to pay attention to their surroundings without becoming paranoid. He could teach families how to recognize unusual situations. He could encourage people to think about emergency communication. He could teach communities how to identify risks before they become disasters. Most importantly, he could teach people not to assume that ordinary life will always continue exactly as it is. His mentorship would not necessarily involve dramatic survival training. It might be simple. Look around. Know where the exits are. Pay attention to unusual behavior. Have a plan. Do not panic. Stay connected to your family. Think before reacting. These lessons come directly from his experiences. Situational awareness as a way of life. Jerry's awareness would probably become almost automatic. When he enters a building, he notices the exits. When he sees a crowd, he observes its movement. When he hears shouting, he looks for the source. When a public system suddenly stops working, he considers why. When someone behaves strangely, he notices. These habits might seem excessive to someone who has never experienced a catastrophe. To Jerry, they are simply part of staying alive. The interesting thing is that he does not necessarily need to live in constant fear. Situational awareness is different from panic. Panic says, something terrible is happening. Awareness says, something might happen. Be prepared. Jerry has learned the second approach. He does not need to run every time he sees a crowd. He does not need to assume every strange noise is an emergency. But he cannot completely turn off the part of his mind that evaluates possibilities. That is the permanent psychological imprint of his experiences. Protecting his family becomes his new mission. Before the outbreak, Jerry's desire for family safety was connected to ordinary life. He wanted his daughters to grow up normally. He wanted Karen to be safe. After the outbreak, protecting them becomes more deliberate. He understands how quickly circumstances can change. His family is no longer protected simply because they live in a peaceful neighborhood. Peace can disappear. Therefore, Jerry may begin treating family preparedness as part of everyday life. He may keep emergency supplies. He may discuss communication plans. He may teach his daughters what to do if they become separated. He may make sure everyone knows where to meet. He may encourage them to remain calm during emergencies. These actions are not necessarily signs that Jerry expects another zombie outbreak. They represent a broader lesson. He now understands that emergencies come in many forms. Natural disasters, infrastructure failures, civil unrest, pandemics, accidents. Whatever the threat, preparation can make the difference between panic and survival. His new mission is therefore not simply, protect my family from zombies. It is broader. Protect the family from vulnerability. Why ordinary life looks different. The most powerful change in Jerry may be how he experiences ordinary life. Before the outbreak, he wanted normality because he was tired of crisis. After the outbreak, normality becomes something precious. A quiet breakfast can feel extraordinary. Driving through an ordinary city can remind him of how close the world once came to collapse. Seeing children play safely can carry emotional weight. Watching people complain about trivial problems may even seem strange to him. He knows how quickly those problems could disappear. This does not mean Jerry becomes cynical about ordinary people. Instead, he becomes deeply aware of the value of ordinary life. He has seen what happens when ordinary life disappears. Therefore, peace is no longer boring. It is precious. The fragility of civilization. Jerry's new worldview is ultimately philosophical. He now sees civilization as something fragile. People often assume that modern society is permanent because it has existed throughout their lives. But Jerry has witnessed how quickly systems can break. The pandemic exposes weaknesses in transportation. It overwhelms hospitals. It disrupts communication. It creates refugee movements. It destabilizes governments. It breaks social trust. It turns ordinary roads into dangerous escape routes. This teaches Jerry that civilization is not guaranteed. It must be continuously maintained. People must cooperate. Institutions must function. Information must be shared. Communities must trust one another. Leadership must remain effective. Without those things, the boundary between order and collapse becomes increasingly thin. Jerry never forgets this. The porous boundary. The idea of a porous boundary between civilization and chaos is especially important. A boundary is supposed to separate two things. But if it is porous, things can move through it. Order and chaos are not completely isolated. Chaos can enter an orderly society. And order can sometimes be rebuilt inside chaos. Jerry sees both sides. Philadelphia demonstrates how quickly order can disappear. Jerusalem demonstrates that even highly organized defenses can fail. The laboratory demonstrates that knowledge and organization can create a new form of order. This means Jerry does not believe that collapse is inevitable. He simply believes that it is possible. That distinction is important. His worldview is not, everything will eventually collapse. It is, everything can collapse if people stop paying attention. That belief makes him cautious but not hopeless. Jerry is not a doomsday prophet. It would be easy to misunderstand Jerry's new awareness as paranoia. But there is a difference between preparing for danger and expecting danger everywhere. Jerry's experience teaches him to respect uncertainty. He does not need to predict every catastrophe. He simply refuses to assume that catastrophe is impossible. That is a more mature worldview. He knows that humans are vulnerable. But he also knows people can adapt. The same crisis that destroys one society can teach another society how to survive. Jerry therefore becomes someone who lives between fear and hope. He is cautious because he has seen disaster. He is hopeful because he has helped find a solution. The quiet partnership with Karen. Karen's relationship with Jerry becomes central to this new life. They have both experienced separation and uncertainty. Their marriage therefore becomes quieter but perhaps deeper. They do not necessarily need long conversations about what happened. They have lived through it. Karen knows that Jerry may always be more alert than he used to be. Jerry knows that Karen has her own fears. Instead of pretending that the past did not happen, they can build a new life around what they have learned. Their partnership becomes practical as well as emotional. They protect each other. They watch the children together. They make plans. They understand that survival is a shared responsibility. This is very different from the idea of a single heroic father saving everyone. Jerry's survival is not an individual achievement. One person can ask an important question. One person can take a risk. But rebuilding the world requires millions. Jerry's role is therefore more like a catalyst. He gives humanity knowledge. Others can build upon it. The burden of knowing. There is another psychological consequence of Jerry's experience. Knowledge itself can become a burden. Jerry knows how bad things can get. Most people around him may never fully understand that. They might look at a peaceful street and simply see a peaceful street. Jerry sees something more complicated. He sees what could happen if systems fail. He understands how fast panic spreads. He knows that a crowd can become dangerous. He knows that a wall can fail. He knows that a city can collapse. He knows that even a secure laboratory can become a place of death. This knowledge can make ordinary life emotionally complicated. Ignorance can sometimes feel peaceful. Jerry no longer has that luxury. He knows too much. His new definition of safety. Jerry's definition of safety also changes. Before the outbreak, safety might have meant being at home. After the outbreak, safety means preparedness. It means knowing what to do. It means having people you trust. It means being able to adapt. It means recognizing danger early. It means having alternatives. This is a deeper definition of safety. A locked door alone is not enough. A strong wall alone is not enough. A weapon alone is not enough. Safety comes from resilience. If one system fails, another must be available. If one route is blocked, another must exist. If communication fails, people need a backup. Jerry has learned this through painful experience. The fear that the solution could fail. Even after the laboratory breakthrough, Jerry may continue wondering whether the defense strategy will work everywhere. This uncertainty fits his personality. He is not a man who assumes success simply because one experiment succeeded. He understands variables. Different people may respond differently. Different diseases may produce different effects. The infected may behave differently under different conditions. The world may contain complications nobody has yet discovered. These thoughts could keep Jerry awake. But they could also motivate him. Rather than abandoning the solution because it is imperfect, he would likely continue looking for ways to improve it. That is the difference between pessimism and realism. Jerry does not need certainty to act. He needs enough evidence to justify the next step. A new kind of hero. Jerry's post-outbreak life can therefore be imagined as the life of a quiet teacher rather than a celebrated warrior. He might help train emergency responders. He might advise governments. He might teach communities about preparedness. He might help families develop emergency plans. But he would probably avoid turning himself into a celebrity. His contribution would be practical. He would tell people to observe, think, prepare, stay calm, protect one another. That would be his legacy. Not a statue. Not a medal. Not a famous speech. A generation of people who know how to remain calm when the world suddenly stops making sense. The deeper meaning of his family. Ultimately, Jerry's family represents what civilization is supposed to protect. The point of survival is not simply to remain alive. It is to preserve the possibility of living meaningful lives. Children should be able to laugh. Families should be able to eat together. People should be able to walk through neighborhoods without fear. Communities should be able to trust one another. Jerry's mission is therefore bigger than keeping his own family alive. By helping humanity survive, he helps preserve the possibility of normal human life. That is why his quiet return home is so meaningful. The family dinner, the familiar house, the simple presence of Karen and the children all represent the world he was fighting to protect. Final perspective. Jerry Lane's story does not truly end when the infected ignore him. That moment is the beginning of his second life. His first life was defined by crisis work, followed by a decision to pursue peace and family. His second life is defined by what he learned when peace disappeared. He now knows that civilization is fragile. He knows that ordinary life can vanish quickly. He knows that walls can fail. He knows that governments can become overwhelmed. He knows that crowds can become dangerous. He knows that survival depends on information. And he knows that humanity's greatest advantage is its ability to observe and adapt. He does not necessarily spend the rest of his life waiting for another apocalypse. Instead, he lives with an awareness that most people do not possess. He watches. He prepares. He teaches. He protects. And most importantly, he appreciates. The quiet life he once wanted now has an entirely different meaning. Before the outbreak, peace was something Jerry wanted because he was tired of danger. After the outbreak, peace becomes something he understands must be protected. That is the deepest transformation in his character. Jerry no longer sees civilization as a permanent state of existence. He sees it as a fragile achievement. Every safe neighborhood depends on people cooperating. Every functioning city depends on systems working. Every peaceful family depends on a wider society that remains stable. The boundary between order and collapse may be thin, but that does not mean collapse must win. Jerry has learned that the same human intelligence that allows civilization to be destroyed can also help rebuild it. His breakthrough gives humanity a defense. His experience gives him wisdom. His family gives him purpose. And his new worldview gives him a responsibility. He must never stop watching for danger. But he also must never forget why he is watching. Not because he expects the world to end again. Not because he wants to live in fear. But because he now understands the value of the world that exists when everything is working. For Jerry Lane, the greatest lesson of the apocalypse is therefore surprisingly simple. Peace is not guaranteed. Civilization is not permanent. Safety is not automatic. But neither is collapse. Human beings can observe. They can learn. They can adapt. They can cooperate. They can rebuild. And they can protect the fragile ordinary life that they once took for granted. Jerry's true triumph is not that he defeats the infected. It is that he discovers how to survive them without losing sight of what survival is actually for.